Okay. So the one of the first questions that I had was in regards to the role of wet nursing during the slavery era.
Okay. What book are we talking about now? Do you want to talk about specifically what you read in the book, or do you want a broad explanation of wet nursing beyond what the book discusses?
Both, a little bit of both. Well, not specific because I don't have this. I don't have the book in front of me, so I don't have necessarily the specifics. But I know that this is mentioned in the book because I heard it on the audiobook, right?
Okay.
So I want you to go into great detail, like do your Dr. D thing as far as
Mm-hmm.
kind of what the book states, and then mixed with your opinion because that really took me back as far as it creating. Well, I want to stay on this because it's gonna go
Okay.
into another question.
Well, number one, if you ever watch my channel and subscribe or follow my videos,
I do.
you would know that I actually did a video on that.
Oh, the wet nursing era.
Yes, I did.
That's crazy.
And it is called the abuse of black female bodies or something. That's either the caption or whatever. But it's a portion of of the videos that really go into the relationship between black women and white women, and this long history of because I have some videos discussing white women white women's role in American history, and obviously that touches the suffrage, that touches slavery, and I now honestly on YouTube you're going to get like thousands of people watch the videos, so you may get 20 responses. But one thing I did notice was that the responses of the white women were a bit not visceral but very defensive. And I think it was now no one really challenges the accuracy of what I'm talking about. Just the I don't want to hear it, that makes me feel bad type thing, and saying that that was then, this is now. And the point is to show how now got to be now. And it's based on a lot of wealth, energy, abuse of the black woman directly benefiting the white woman. So when we're talking today about politics today, there is a disproportionate outcome that has gone over time where white women have gotten to their level in society today because of black women. And this is all the way up through the civil rights era, in which I was pointing out to you and what I was writing last night was blacks didn't become citizens of this country until 1964, 1965. 1965, my parents were 15. My oldest brother was born 3 years after that. I was born 7 years after that. This is not ancient history. We're talking about me. So if I was born 7 years earlier, I would not be a United States citizen because we do know that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment did not, were facile legislation because the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965 were a restatement of those three amendments. So we're talking all the way into modern history, our lifetimes, that these dynamics were going on. All right. And this wealth was being built and extracted from this group, and particularly this book. They were her slaves. She's touching on that relationship over time. And what grabbed you was the wet nursing part. Um, you got to kind of take a couple steps back before you get to the wet nursing to find out the real atrocities and how the black woman's body, not just her labor, not just her talents, not just her intellect, her body was used
Yeah.
for the wealth of these people.
Yeah, and it goes a little bit further outside of just the benefit of white women. It also had a benefit of white men as well by, you know, raping, abusing, and stuff like that. Just to procreate and keep. It's almost like they treated us like cattle.
Oh no, it was worse because we had a greater intellect than cattle. But that's the difference. History is very misogynistic. It's always about the men. Mm-hmm. Well, what has happened is white women have kind of got that pass to slide through these atrocities where it's the white men, the white men, the white men. And no, they were in the jacuzzi with them, mm-hmm. getting the benefits laid back. And that's mm-hmm. what this book is pointing out. But saying that we have to take a step back before we even get to the wet nursing, because the wet nursing means I'm lactating. Mm-hmm. Why was I lactating?
Because because they more than likely just had a kid. One thing in the book that stood out to me was that one particular, I guess, supportive argument that she utilized was one of the slave owners would make her slave have a baby every time she would, just so she had the ability to feed her baby and the white woman's.
Well, when you get into chapter 1 and chapter 2, there was a change. See, what the book is establishing, the first premise is wealth was passed through white women through slavery. Okay, they were more readily able to inherit slaves than land. And this was throughout their lives, from the time that they were little girls up to turning, birthday parties, Christmas, whatever. They were either given slaves to play with, they were given adult slaves to take care of them, and they were as abusive as any male slave. They completely understood the slave system, and they participated in it directly. They were recognized as slave owners, not, back then they have coverture. This research kills coverture. So a lot of white women have gotten excused of the atrocities of slavery due to the coverture policy in either state law or common law. And coverture was basically everything you own your husband got once you got married. And she has produced research as to where when a slave ran away, people went to go get the slave and returned them to the woman. Or when they had slave notices for the people to come back, they said this slave belongs to Rian, not Rian's husband.
So didn't they also have, and I forget the specific name of it, but then they also have laws where they separated the property of the husband and the wife, like
yes.
where
yes.
she had the ability. I know that they mentioned something about Louisiana, like you had to actually file mm-hmm. to have your assets separate from your husband mm-hmm. in the state of Louisiana. I believe they mentioned, I don't know if it was Mississippi, but I know for a fact it was Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. And that obviously was because everybody's not, just because I have testosterone, mm-hmm. that doesn't make me a financial wizard. Mm-hmm. And if you come from an affluent family and you marry me and I get your wealth because you've gotten, let's say you're 20 years old when I meet you and you got one slave a year because your parents could afford it. Mm-hmm. We got 20 slaves. Mm-hmm. If we got a little bit of land, we got a nice little workforce, mm-hmm. right? Well, I can be messing up because I don't know. So at some point, people had to go, okay, look, that's yours, this mine. Mm-hmm. And wealthy people have always known how to protect their wealth because she still has her family mm-hmm. to kind of guide her. And a lot of times they would give slaves in a particular way that the husband couldn't get control of them. because of that reason. A lot of times in fact, that's where we were getting to, because still on the wet nurse thing, they would give female slaves more than male slaves because females at that time were all pushed toward domesticated work. And a female slave would make the female's life better. You know, taking care of the house, less stuff for you to do, somebody to take care of you and take care of your duties. Pretty much, the husband, that's on you, bruh. You know, the fields or whatever you're doing, that's on you. But we're giving slaves to our daughter to make her life better. So that was one way where females were being preferred. But then the slave trade ended. And what they started doing was doing what they called developing a natural labor force, which were breeding farms. And now the price of female slaves went up because they made baby slaves. So it wasn't you get pregnant every time I get pregnant. It was you get pregnant every time you can get pregnant. And then they were forcing you, because I'm making you get pregnant. And if you didn't get pregnant, there was a case in there that she referred to where a lady was beaten because she couldn't get pregnant. Then they sold her. Now, think about the time. Prenatal care, if it existed, do you really think it was being used on the slaves? And then something that I have not seen in any of my research, PTSD. Think about trying to reproduce in the midst of sexual assault, intimidation, physical abuse, psychological abuse, economic abuse, all of that going on. The stress of your body. Do you know how strong black women had to be, or enslaved women in particular had to be able to take a baby full term under that type of stress? So these people were having 20 babies at a time. They had not at once, not a litter, but they were having over the course of their life 20, 25 babies because that's what they're there for, right? So if I'm constantly pregnant, I'm constantly lactating.
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying we had to step back, because how did I get to where I'm producing milk? And that's the problem. Too many times they would start the story, and I've seen the pictures in the book of female slaves nursing a white baby. But that's where the story started. But we had to back up and was like, okay, how did the female slave become preferred? Then how was she in a position? Because as a guy, if you've been married, you know lactation has a window as to when it starts and when it stops. And something has to keep it going. You're either breastfeeding constantly, because as long as you're breastfeeding, your body will keep doing it. If you stop long enough, then it'll stop. Or if the body's pregnancy cycle starts over again, and then it'll start to prepare again. So when I saw that in the book, it was not new to me. But I think it's definitely something that needs to be looked at because of the black body, and then in particular the black female body. So when you have white women saying the past is in the past, you are the beneficiary of my ancestors' abuse. Where you're sitting, I didn't own a slave, but where you're sitting in society today is a result of that.
Well, I think it also still plays out in today between the relationships amongst like black women and white women, especially the power dynamic. So you still see a little bit of that today, as far as the struggle just with getting along and the entitlement of white women.
I don't see it being a little bit. I see it being on the surface. I think it's even if it's not. I am aware of all of the abuses that occurred for you to have a particular position and me to have a particular position. I don't know if that is the psychological awareness, but there would have to be. We're talking hundreds of years. Again, I'm telling you, shortly before I was born, we're talking, let's say if everybody, some genetic mutation occurred in white people, and in 1965, they genetically mutated out of abusing Native Americans, black people, Mexicans, the systems that were put in place for these things to change, because we still function under the same United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. We still function under the same Constitution of all the states. We still function under the same 13th Amendment in particular. We still function under the same judiciary system that Abraham Lincoln put in control of slavery in the 13th Amendment. Mm-hmm. So even if white people changed by some genetic, I don't know what would have happened genetically to change them. For 400 years, this was the attitude and approach that you had. And then suddenly, in 1965, that happened. The people who did it up to 1965 still got to live their lives out. How do you think that's not still present today? The people that did it are still walking around. Not leave the past in the past. He's right there. The president.
Yeah.
Joe Biden has been on the wrong side of racial legislation since Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And he said, and this is not my opinion, I'm not political. Mm-hmm. He said, I'm sorry. My bad. That 3-strike rule was off. Mm-hmm. That mandatory minimum was off. That truth in sentencing was off. Mm-hmm. The 1994 crime bill was off. Mm-hmm. The militarization of the police departments was off. The war on drugs was off. He said it. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to get too far off topic. I think I answered your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. So elaborate a bit more on the wet nurse sector and how exactly it grew in the slave trade. Like how did that become more popular?
Well,
I know you talked about it a little bit.
This is how, when the slave trade was being shut down, England was in the front of it. England was like, yo, we need to stop. Now, I've seen some literature on, and I have a buddy in England, and I need to do some studying on England. So I will learn the Civil War, because that's my area of expertise, from the viewpoint of England. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily because England necessarily had a dog in the fight, but we were originally English citizens. That would be interesting. But I also want to look into England's motivation in stopping slavery. I know what is pretty much out in the literature now, but there's some things that I feel have not been addressed. One thing that has not been addressed is the Industrial Revolution, which started in England, was financed by chattel slavery in the 13 colonies. They became the preeminent world power because of chattel slavery in the 13 colonies. That was their That was their income property.
So it's safe to say that England also benefited from slavery.
England was North American slavery saved Europe. Europe's economy was tapped. They had done all that they could do. England, Europe is basically like New England. You can drive from London to France to Scotland, all in the same day. These are very small countries. Okay, this is not. We are very rare to be a continental country. England got to be, when they started the Industrial Revolution, they tried to keep it. So everybody had to come to them for these new revolutionary production abilities, but it ended up getting out. So it is very logical that because they were trying to protect the industrial technology that they had, they were also trying to stop anyone from getting finance to be able to do something on that scale. What was the only way that they knew you could get financing to do what they did? The way they did it, slavery. So there is an argument that England did not stop slavery for any moral reason. Again, what's the genetic mutation that happened in England? Because from 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, to 1807, was that 200 years? What, do you know how many generations? That's 10 generations. What changed the hearts and minds of English people? They learned after 200 years? Okay, that doesn't make sense to me. So, they're trying to stop the slave activity so you can't catch up to me. So there are some people in the United States that's like, no, this is the only way we've done it. No, we need slaves. And there was other people that said, wait a minute. If they have sex, we make our own. Then they began to make super slaves. They would go get the biggest, strongest woman, the biggest, strongest man, and make them have kids. There you go. Ah. Well, the unfortunate part is the biggest, strongest men sometimes came from the biggest, strongest women. They would make the sons make their mothers. They would, now, because these people knew each other, sometimes they would bag their heads. Think about it. You may not feel like, you may not feel like it. That wasn't an option. It was a lot of abuse. So think about the sexual terror that the European was willing to inflict for things. So when we look at blacks only owning 0.5% of America's wealth, and the bulk being owned by white people, and white people are saying, I got this because I worked harder. You say, no, you didn't. Not only did you get a head start, you had a head start in the most inhumane way. And then you say, well, I didn't do it. That's akin to somebody going to rob your house, taking everything out of your house and putting it in my house. And when you come to confront me about it, I say, I ain't the one that broke in your house, but you sitting on my couch. You're enjoying my microwave. You're enjoying all of the things that came out of my house. So, but I ain't the one that took it. I ain't got nothing to do with it. If I am the beneficiary of what happened. And my voting, my politics, my attitude is one that perpetuates conservatism, meaning keeping things the way they are, conserving, saving. I'm keeping this system in place where I am benefiting off your resources. So people begin to see economic opportunities of domestic slave breeding. And these businesses began to come out and they're starting to see the diverse uses. Okay, I can have making children because you can't decide what kind of child is born. It's going to be males and females. So it's a matter of maximizing my my investment. Okay, I got you to have a kid. You probably can't get pregnant for another 2 months. How can I be making money in that time? That's where what you asked me about the wet nursing industry. So now we're sending her around to
wet nurse for
the white women.
Multiple white women.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So why do you think white women utilize harsher methods of punishment than white men? I also thought that was pretty interesting, and I also thought it was interesting that some of their husbands would leave them because they saw that side of just brashness and the abuse that they would do to some of the slaves.
Well, I think if I am very careful to get into comparing abuse. You know, I say, well, your sexual assault wasn't as bad as my sexual assault. No, how about we just gonna say sexual assault is bad, and you had a horrible experience, and I had a horrible experience. But to say that the women were worse than the guys, that's something that I try to.
Not the book.
I understand. I understand that was her premise, but can it really be worse? You know what I'm saying? I think I think that is an overcorrection to say that, oh man, these women were worse, because history has given white women this big pass. So it's a shock to hear that they act like their brothers and fathers and uncles and grandfathers. But if you read the Willie Lynch letter, I don't see how you can get worse than that. So once you hit a level of sickness, because that's what it is, and that's one thing that I want to point out to people today, that slavery went on for so long and it was so bad. Nobody can come out of that norm. Nobody. That's like war. Even the side that's won got messed up, okay? If I lie, torture, abuse, physically abuse, sexually abuse, intimidate, for hundreds of years, that has to saturate my culture. I now have to reconcile, because everybody thinks they're a good person, because these are the same people going to church praising God and praising Jesus. And, so I have to have a leveling of my dogma or my doctrine and my activity. That's called cognitive dissonance. I have to balance out why it's okay that I do what I do when it doesn't align with my higher power or my religious doctrine. So that means I have to become, to be, and the worse the extent, the greater the mental overcorrection has to be. And that overcorrection, over hundreds of years, we're talking better part of 500 years, because after 400 years of slavery, you still got 100 years up till 1964, 1965, because you still got convict leasing, you got black codes, you got Jim Crow, you got Plessy versus Ferguson segregation, then you got civil rights resistance. So you still got all of that 100 years too that everybody tried not to count. So, 1965, everything was good. No, it wasn't. Okay. So now, I have been able to be the worst person I have to be, Emmett Till being a perfect example of that. When that lady just died within a few years ago, within a few years, you can live with yourself being connected to something like that. And you would be married to a man that would do that. Your brother helped him.
Didn't they both end up, I think, dying from cancer, I think? Something like that?
I believe so. You I lost my train of thought. What was the question? I don't want to get way off of it. That's what happened when you old.
It was
There's one thing on swing.
Oh, the harsher punishment.
The harsh punishment, yes. So now, this group has gone for 500 years having to justify behavior where they're not responsible, where it's okay for what they did, right? And that is passed to their children the way that we think. Even if so, that means I don't have. So when people say now, well, I didn't do it, I didn't own slaves, I didn't. Yes, but that is showing the disconnect in your situations and circumstances and your outcomes. I don't even want to, because I didn't do it, I'm not going to recognize that there is systems in place that are still bringing disproportionate outcomes. I'm devoid of the ability to see your perspective at all. Even though when LBJ, after they killed Dr. King, he was like, what do they want? What are they mad at? So he puts all these academics together and they go out and they do research on why black folks is mad. It's called the Kerner Report. You have never heard a president mention the Kerner Report. That is online, it ain't hidden. You just look at it. And that is basically the core of what you hear called CRT, critical race theory. It brings out this is the president's researchers. This ain't black folk. Black folks just called it. The information they brought back to the highest office in the country was everything that ails black folks is a system controlled by white people. Housing, police violence, education, access to wealth, jobs, and a few other things. But those are the top 5. Have you ever heard a president mention the Kerner Report, including Barack Obama?
Personally, I don't recall.
That's a pretty important resource if you're going to argue critical race theory. I haven't, and I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't heard Mark Lamont Hill, Kimberly Crenshaw. These are some of our black scholars at the top of the CRT game. Never make that connection. I don't understand that. Because that's the proof. You did this research. I didn't even do it. But you're saying that these systems don't exist. Now, the problem that we have are a lot of people are talking about critical race theory, and they don't even know what critical race theory is. Mm-hmm. They think history that's dealing with black folks and the stuff white people did, that's critical race theory. That's not critical race theory.
So I want you to go ahead and explain what critical race theory is for everybody.
Critical race theory is the identification of the systems that were put in place to maintain the status quo that deal with race relations, economically, housing, safety, jobs, how these keep producing, because if you have a system in place, there does not have to be a meeting. When we all have the same agenda, there doesn't have to be a meeting of the minds. We keep this because you can attack the people, the system is going to, that's like the tax code is written a particular way for it to come out a particular way. Our judicial system functions a certain way to have particular outcomes. There is no surprise that melanated people, people of African descent, people from the African diaspora were chosen in this country as the key to the business model of low labor cost, high profits. It is a direct correlation between people of African descent and that business model. So when Lincoln ended chattel slavery, he took the ability for the private sector to own slavery and put it to the judiciary. That's why he said you can be a slave if it's punishable by a crime. So who now makes the decision if you're a slave? Not somebody with money, the judge. So now we went from chattel slavery to penal slavery. And disproportionately, immediately, starting in 1865. I ain't talking about, well, gradually, and people say, how do you connect the two? No, immediately in 1865, they started convict leasing. So they started putting the same folk back in jail and said, well, since we can't hold all you millions of people that we're arresting, we're gonna lease you out to the plantation that we just freed you from. And so now I have less reason. So now you're in a worse slavery because I wouldn't kill you before because I owned you. And the longer I got you, the longer, the more I'm going to make money. But if you're a lease, think about it. Do you take care of a rental car like you take care of your car? No. So now that's what's going on. And then so that was one economic system. Then you had Jim Crow. That's another economic system. Then you had how the housing codes were being written. Then you have how the union codes were being written. So people being able to access wealth, get jobs, stuff like that. How political codes are being written. Voting codes are being written. These systems that are creating either low outcomes, no outcomes, or high outcomes in favor of another group. Following what those systems are, identifying those systems and following those systems and measuring their disproportionate outcomes, that's what critical race theory is. It's saying, here are the rules and regulations associated with this particular policy, and it is written with these outcomes being maintained. We need to address these particular pieces of policy to even up this disproportionate outcome. That's what critical race theory is. So now you can't teach that in fourth grade.
So my question is, why do you think all of the confusion come with critical race theory and what you just explained, because what they're spewing in media and everything like that is that, hey, critical race theory is everything in alignment with the traumas of black folks, and we don't want our kids to feel bad. Just to sum it up, that's basically what they're telling us, right? Mm-hmm. But that's completely different than what you just explained.
Because fear politics has been used since the colonial days. That's one of the earliest examples of it are the anti-miscegenation laws of 1676. No, 1682. 1676 was Bacon's Rebellion, which is why the anti-miscegenation laws came about. But that was where it started. And that was actually the birth of whiteness. There was no identification of a homogenous white group before 1682. It didn't exist. You were Irish, you were Italian, you were Slavic, you were Russian, it was no grouping. And that was where it began with the anti-miscegenation laws. That was the beginning of whiteness on this continent. And it was these people, once they separated, what they did was, you can't tell that story without Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was a guy who, before racism really took in, because Native Americans, race was so, they hadn't really perfected the race thing until they really messed with the black people, because it was just eradicate them. You know, we don't want them to stay around. They needed us to be around for the labor, so they had to really work how they had to make a race culture with rules and customs and you know, they actually had to work it, because I got to live with these people. But how racism worked with Native Americans, it was just killing. So without the presence of a well-structured racial system, it was a class system. And long story short, this white guy, again, we're the colonies, we're not America, named Bacon, had an uncle who was a governor for England, and he wanted to get into the buffalo trades. And that was upper crust. Buffalo trades is upper crust. And he told him, nah, bro, you punching outside your weight class. You stay down there with the little money. This the big money. And he was like, oh, really? So he went and got, because at that time, it's just class. So he went and got everybody in the lower class, Native Americans, blacks, Mexicans. And he was like, hey, it's more us than it is them, which is kind of what happened in Haiti. And he was like, let's go. So the rich people couldn't defend themselves against the poor people. England had to come. England came, shut it down, and there's communication between the colonies and England, because they were like, how are y'all going to stop this from happening again? Well, what they did was, and this is in writing. That's what when people talk about, oh, there's no covert plan of white people. Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Willie Lynch's letter, one of them. The anti-miscegenation laws, another one. What they did was they said, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make an agreement between poor white people and rich white people. We get the big money. But the money that is allocated for the lower class, you get the lion's share of it, and you get to rule the lower class with impunity. They didn't elevate the poor whites. They dropped everybody else. You can own land. You can own guns. You can control what happens with everybody else? Everybody else wasn't allowed to own guns. Now I can't protect my women. I can't protect my land. I can't protect my family. I can't. Just taking my gun away. I can't own land. I can't own a house. I can't. I'm cut off from my access to wealth. So the non-white people were now having to work for somebody else. I can't work my land. I can't own land. I can't even protect myself. So now you have an elevated, now it's a created level of fear because I could probably handle you with these, but you got guns. So that's where, and then the upper class always kept the lower white class in fear of leveling this playing field. They're going to take your jobs. They're going to take your this. They're going to take your that. Now, what poor whites have never, to this day, come to terms with, and I'm speaking very generally, purposefully, I'm not saying any poor white never thought of this. The rich white person is the one that would be able to give it. He can't take my job if you don't hire him. He can't move in my neighborhood if the laws don't say that he can do this. So whatever changes, you would have to do it. So we were always caught in between the war between rich white people and poor white people. And if you don't believe me, look at the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement were white people, generally poor white people, saying, how you gonna make him equal to me? And notice I didn't say Southern. Because when you make him equal to me, that wasn't our agreement. That was not our agreement. I am supposed to be able to run down here with impunity. I can kill him if I want to. That was our agreement. You get the money, I get down here. But now the problem is there's so few people up there and so many people down here. When it gets too bad, I got to kind of pay attention to it because I got to keep the economics straight. So that was why this issue of anti-miscegenation started. That started that fear mongering between these two groups to keep your mind off of the money that's up here. Now, when they put, this is mixed with literacy. A lot of people just don't read. Most people, and Marc Lamont Hill, Dr. Marc Lamont Hill, is an excellent example of it. If you watch any of his videos, it's like a series of CRT videos that he did against people. I mean, legislators, allegedly educated people, hot about CRT. Folks writing articles and going to school boards, and legislators putting forth policy. And he asked him, can you tell me what CRT is? They can't tell me. Can you tell me what, he said, name one scholar CRT. They can't name them. So you haven't read anything about it. All you know is Trump said critical race theory is teaching white kids that white people are bad. And we shouldn't be teaching anything that makes anybody feel bad.
That kind of goes back to your point. It's like the rich whites are pulling the strings and they're utilizing those poor whites to do the naysaying.
James Baldwin said the biggest slave group in America has always been poor white people. And the worst part of it is that they don't know. So that's very true.
So one of my next questions was, I don't necessarily recall seeing, and I could be wrong, I don't necessarily recall seeing a whole bunch of white women at the slave auctions being depicted in those pictures. So I wanted you to explain, why don't you necessarily think that we, in the book, they made it a point for them to have depictions or pictures of the auctions, but they made sure to keep white women out of those pictures, just pushing the fact that it was only white men.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same reason why we all know that Jesus was white with light brown eyes and smooth flowing hair. Even though the Bible don't describe him that way, and the picture looks exactly like Caesar Borgia, people don't let a good story don't let history or facts get in the way of a good story. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't blame white men. I believe we're supposed to elevate our women. I think we're supposed to show our women in the best light. And I don't see any benefit to white men showing the worst of white women, which is why a lot of our history shows the best of white people. I could have started a site that continued that form of teaching or that pedagogy, but I chose or choose to show what's not being shown. Why am I going to tell you what you already know? And I touch on a lot of history that's not necessarily dealing with race or dealing with slavery. But you can't talk about the formation of the country without talking about everybody that was involved. And our white women were very involved in the country. Suffragists is a huge movement. You can't tell, that's half the population. You can't tell this story without the white woman. You can't tell the story of slavery without the white woman. And that's why I appreciated They Were Her property to the extent to which I did, because it allows you to understand how deep in the fabric slavery was. It was not just these guys, these horrible guys that did this. It showed how pervasive it was from childhood to adulthood in white men and white women, and the effects that it had on black men and black women for how long? In perpetuity. So it's funny when people talk about PTSD. PTSD is basically an amount of stress that occurs due to elevated stimulation before the nervous system snaps. A general military tour, I believe, is 15 months. And we have come to find out that this is a regular psychological occurrence in the human psyche. 400 years of chattel slavery and a subsequent 160 years of penal slavery. We don't think that there's supposed to be any psychological residue. Leave the past in the past. That's just like somebody with PTSD saying, I'm all right. And you're going, no, dude, you have it. Can't you see these problems coming out in your life today because of what happened? Some people are in denial that they have PTSD. And some people are saying, you can't hold me accountable for what I'm doing because I have PTSD. And it's no different with society and how America was formed. You talking about, Mexicans are coming in. Why isn't nobody upset about the Canadian border? Why are we not building a wall on the Canadian border? We ain't steal no land from Canada. We don't want these people to come back. If you found out how Texas was annexed, how can you annex something?
Was it just Texas? I believe it was Texas and New Mexico, right? It was still technically Mexico.
Well, everything west of Texas up to about from the border to mid Idaho was Mexico.
Okay.
That was taken through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Texas was annexed. Now, you can't annex something you don't have jurisdiction over or belong to the agent that has jurisdiction over. So just the words that they choose to use. It's not a treaty if it's at gunpoint. I say I want it. They said, no, you just stole Texas. I'm going to let you have it. Beat your feet on the concrete. I don't want to do no more business with you. So I go to war with you. And the only way you sign this treaty is I'm not going to stop killing you unless you do. That's duress in American law. So then you sign it, and I say, okay, I'm going to give you $15 million. California alone. We're not going to talk about all the gold mines. We ain't going to talk about the silver mines. We're not going to talk about the oil in Texas.
Yeah, the oil.
Okay? $15 million. And now when the people are coming back, what you said with Darnell, you being hypocritical, man. That's how it is, and that's fine. But we support Israel. Israel was wrongly sent off of their land. Many decades later, they came back. Now, some other people that was there who had nothing to do with them getting put off. But we both have two legal claims to this land. It was wrongly taken from me. You had it. So, right, wrong, or indifferent that's going on in Palestine and Israel, I'm talking about America's attitude and its support for Israel. So you are in support of somebody coming back to their land after hundreds of years. But you're going to build a wall for Mexico. Why aren't you going to give Mexico land like you said Israel should have a state? Why aren't you going to give Native Americans a state like Israel have a state? If you agree with Israel, that's all I'm saying. Let's not be hypocrites. Anything else?
No.
All right, man, that was
That's
good.
it.